Dear viewers, welcome once again to another episode of What's Brewing. We are still in the middle of the circuit breaker here in Singapore, with the COVID-19 still increasing and in local cases as well as around the world. But we're trying to make more sense of what's happening and what's going to happen after all this is over. So we have with us today Mr. Karamjit Singh, Karamjit Viji as I call him, is the CEO and founder of Showsuite, which is a property portal and also offers consultancy services to the properties and development sector in Singapore. He's no stranger to the property market, having been involved in it for a long while and is a common face in local media on all matters involving property. Thank you, Vijay, for joining us today.
Thanks, Mel, for having me, and congrats on the new channel.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, Vijay, one of the things that I think we want to talk about is the impact that we may see on the property sector in Singapore. And that's something that many of our viewers will be very keen in from multiple perspectives. So, for instance, let's talk a bit about the corporate sector and commercial spaces. So, COVID-19 has seen businesses, including in retail and F&B, suffer. And even though government measures have helped with the costs, the reality is that revenue streams for many of them have grounded to a halt. So many may not be viable in the time to come. What impact do you think all of these will have on the commercial property sector in Singapore?
Sure. So it's quite profound, and there are two components to the entire commercial property sector. So that's retail on one hand and offices, and both of them will be affected, but in different ways. Retail, as you've correctly pointed out, there's been a short-term disruption, and then there will be some sectors that will be affected in the longer term and may not be completely viable at all. So whenever consumer spending drops, obviously values and rentability of shops will go down in tandem. There will be certain retails that will never be viable, especially those that can be replaced through e-commerce. Secondly, businesses that tend to pack in and thrive on in crowds. So that's entertainment, exhibition, conferences or so. Well, some of these businesses can be reinvented through technology, but we will have a problem with the landlord and their space that they will have. So they would need to think about repurposing them. So that's all about retail and big space. But I think the bigger impact would be to the office space scene, because this lockdown or circuit breaker, as we call it here in Singapore, is changing how we work. So work from home is a new phenomenon that's been forced upon everybody. It was daunting beforehand, but it's now companies are beginning to realize that it's not too bad. Meetings are taking place through video calls like what we're doing right now. Conferences, likewise, presentations, and it seems to be not too bad. Not too much drop in productivity. And there are a lot of positives that have come out of it, in that, business continuity planning is a big factor right now and needs to be looked hand in hand with risk management. And these are all lessons we've learned from this episode. So major corporates will have to think about decentralizing the space that they have the staff work out of. So instead of having maybe 2 or 3 different offices, the best kind of formula might end up being one central, main office, and then the back offices can be from home. So through these satellites, we will have achieved the perfect type of decentralization, thereby cutting down bottlenecks that we end up achieving in transportation also. So there will be a lot of long-term benefit if we can cement this new work culture, and I think this is a culture that will be here to stay.
Right, and I suppose even for the central office, we might see changes like more hot desking options, and even the office just probably being more of a front for clients than working purposes, as you mentioned.
Correct. So it's not just purely work from home as a standalone strategy. This needs to be worked hand in hand with, like what you mentioned, hot desking, because at some point of time, you do need to bring them back to the office again. And so they need a space to operate out of. Secondly, it's also a case where the planning density needs to alter. In the past, you could have 1.2 meter tables or 1 meter tables. Now you need to space them out. So that means for the same square footage, you can maybe pack in less people. So how can we make it more clever, versatile, and use different type of furniture that actually can go around all these constraints?
Right. In terms of residential property, we have seen for Q1 this year, both private and public housing (HDB) transactions and sales plunge. Is this a reflection of the residential market here for a while to come? And is it possible then that we may see a crash of the residential market, or have the cooling measures in recent years sort of mitigated such swings?
So Q1 this year saw volumes drop 12-13%. So it's not too bad. I think the real impact will be seen in the second quarter because we've been forced to shut down. So no viewings can take place. Everyone's working from home. Developers' show flats have been ordered to shut. So with that, then obviously sales will plunge, and it's not plunged to zero. There are deals that are still taking place, but using online channels and otherwise, but it has come off. But by the disruption, it actually also means that there is a creation of a pent-up demand because fundamentally, at the base level, housing market seems to be all right. It's very, very much more solid, grounded, stable than we found ourselves getting into the global financial crisis, for example, in 2007, 2008. At that point of time, there was a lot of speculative nature. There was a lot of hot money coming in because of the excitement around the IR, and prices shot up very fast. After the GFC, a lot of lessons were learned, and it's no different from what the lessons we're learning from this current crisis. So, few things took place after the GFC. One is major markets started printing money, quantitative easing. So, US, EU, Japan, UK all started printing money. So, interest rates plunged. Secondly, China, the outflow of money out of China became a huge phenomenon. And that single factor could change the equilibrium or move the needle in many markets that it lands into. So because of these two, every housing market needed some protection. Singapore and Hong Kong started early and came up with a slew of measures. The sum effect of all these measures has made our market very, very much more controlled, grounded, stable. And I think that's the thing that's going to save us this time around.
Right. So, given that we also saw prices fall in Q1, as you mentioned, we may see a worse impact on volume of transactions in the next quarter, or at least this quarter. And there were also fewer launches during this period last quarter. What impact will that have on developers? And do you anticipate any consolidation of the market?
Well, not really. And the reason for that is because they can afford to delay their launches. Those who are looking to launch in the second quarter are already thinking that it's not too bad for them to think about postponing it to a third quarter or maybe even the fourth quarter, just in case the third quarter is still not so stable as yet. Most developers at the moment as we speak still have some luxury of time to be able to delay the launches. The space that they're facing more of a crunch is meeting deadlines to complete the construction of projects that they bought maybe 3 years, 4 years ago. So they'll probably need some space, some relief measures, but for the time being, it's okay. They do also have a timeline to meet in terms of selling out their entire inventory from the time that they made the purchase of a land. So they've got 5 years here in Singapore. And if they fail to sell in 5 years, then obviously they will be penalized with a penalty. The peak of that is going to kick in 2022, 2023. So again, a bit of a runway there. At some point of time, they will need to ask for help. And I think the government will hopefully listen. And I think they've got their hands full with other more pressing things. When the dust settles, I believe that's an area that they will look into.
Right. So besides the developers, of course, the property agents are another group that are facing a very tough time currently, even though there have been government assistance schemes to help them for self-employed individuals. Some of them are getting help from that. but the profession may face the brunt of a slowing market. And how do you see this disrupting the way property agents work and the entire sector for change going forward?
Sure. So property agents obviously thrive whenever there are transactions. When the transactions drop, then earnings drop. So that's what exactly we're seeing in the second quarter. Um, but again, it's not a case where the requirements for rental flat or an office space or the purchase of it is going to go away. It's not that the deals are going to evaporate. The deals are being delayed. So eventually the earnings will kick in back again and they'll be back on their feet. Um, so I think they should be fine eventually, but they will need to kind of tie over this tough period. And I understand a lot of the major property agents are kind of helping their agents through cash advances or so. So I think they will be fine. But the fact of the matter is that it's not every property agent here in Singapore is raking in the big bucks. It's probably only 5-10% of them. And the reason for that is we are overpopulated in this space. And I'll give you an example. In Singapore, I'm told that we've got about 5,000 lawyers. We've got about 13,000 doctors. But in the property agency space, it's 30,000. So quite clearly, there are too many property brokers in a small market. And that also explains why the earnings are not evenly spread across, because it's only the effective few that are kind of dominating the space.
Right. So you might see some consolidation here and then thereby maybe having some upward adjustment on earnings as well of the individuals.
Eventually, the market would need some consolidation. And I think what needs to happen also is to kind of raise the barriers to entry, so that people who are thinking of jumping into the industry would need to think through that very carefully and be prepared that there might be several months of dry earnings, and hopefully they will think about something else. But it's a tough time overall. People are looking out for new career switches, especially those that have been affected not only by this but also technological disruptions.
Right. So do you see digitalization coming more into play for property agents?
I think that's there in every industry. So any traditional industry that has had been slow to adopt and embrace technology will see that fast tracking right now. And I think it's just a matter of survival more than a luxury. There's a strong need. A business case has all gone up to support the investment in technology and change how we function and think. It's those traditional retailers, for example, that have been thriving purely from their traditional way of retailing, and they didn't embrace e-commerce. Yeah, so now they're kicking themselves. Obviously, every industry needs to be omni-channel.
Right. So, of course, the real estate sector in Singapore is heavily dependent on government regulation and policies. So, in light of all these developments that we discussed today, do you anticipate any policy measures that might help mitigate some of these setbacks we spoke about, or that can help in and aid in the transformation of the sector?
So there are short-term reliefs that have already been dished out. That's to hopefully prevent jobs from being lost, prevent companies from folding, prevent default mortgage payments, and also rental payments. So the laws have been rushed and enacted such that if a landlord doesn't receive rent or bank doesn't receive mortgage payments, they can't kind of take action or repossess the properties. They will need to at least give the borrowers and the tenants at least 6 months. So of kind of relief, the debt doesn't go away. It can be restructured. And so that's a great thing. But these are all short-term fixes. Over the long term, obviously, how much additional help the industry would need really depends on the damage that will be seen manifest itself as we go along. Developers are facing construction delays. So that's the one obvious thing that I think the government could well afford to step in and help them by extending deadlines. So through the supply disruptions, construction workers have been asked to stay back. So with that, obviously things have been delayed. Whether some of the cooling measures, there's scope for that to be unwound, I think it really depends on the damage. And if the case calls for it and things go very bad because the entire disruption gets prolonged, then I think there's lots of scope for that to take place. But I'm quite sure they will think through this very carefully, calibrate it only as and when needed.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much, Reggie. You have updated us about what's brewing in the property sector in Singapore. So before we leave, what's brewing in your cup of? What's your favorite drink? I'm obviously a chai connoisseur. What's your favorite hot brew?
Well, masala tea is the thing that keeps me up in the morning. But off late, I've been drinking brew coffee, South Indian brew coffee. And so that's an enjoyable hot drink in the afternoon. So I get the kind of the best of both in that sense in a day.
Absolutely. Can't deny and can't argue with that. Thank you, Vijay. Thank you for spending your time with us. We'll be in touch again. Take care.
Pleasure.
See you.
All right, Mel. Take care. Stay safe.